for schools, youth, and family ministry. Sounds like you've got your hands full up in the Wisconsin South Wisconsin district, huh?
It keeps me busy.
Good, good. Well, it's great to have you with us today, and we're going to turn it over to you. But let's begin with a word of prayer. Gracious Lord, our Heavenly Father, we give you thanks for the opportunities you give us in ministry. We pray, O Lord, that you would bless our time today as we look at that wonderful opportunity, that joyous opportunity we have to serve those around us, especially the children, in education and in bringing them up in the knowledge of you and in the one true faith. Lord, we pray you bless our webinar, our time, our presenter, and our attendees, that it would be profitable to us in the work that we do, that you have called us to do for you. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen. A little reminder, folks, if you do have any questions, there's a chat bar feature over on the left-hand side. Please type any questions you have there, and towards the end, we'll start addressing those. And Mark, I turn it over to you.
All right. Well, good afternoon. Thank you for allowing me to spend some time with you talking specifically about rural and small town schools and determining their effectiveness and functionality. Before we jump into the presentation, let me tell you a little bit about myself, my family and my career. First and foremost, my family. I'm married to my wife, Kathy. She is a school counselor and an adjunct professor at Concordia University in Wisconsin. We have 4 children, one who is a sophomore in one of our Lutheran high schools here in the greater Milwaukee area, an 8th grader, a 5th grader, and a kindergartner who also attend one of our Lutheran elementary schools. I am the education executive for South Wisconsin. I've held this position for the past 4 years. We live in a suburb of Milwaukee, but our district offices are located here in Milwaukee. A little bit about myself, and you can see on the screen there just my experiences after graduating from Concordia Seward. I'm going to give you a little bit of history, more so demographics of each of these locations, as it will kind of help define where we are at, not only in Lutheran school ministry, but also just how much common many of these schools had with each other. So I took my first position as a teacher to Hope Lutheran School in Pompano Beach. It was just located north of Fort Lauderdale. The population was just over, think of the east coast of Florida. It's basically one big city, but Pompano Beach had about 1,000 or 100,000 people in it. It was classified as an urban school. It was a combination of different ethnicities and origins. It was considered multicultural, a white or a mix of both white and blue collar community. The enrollment was about 120 students. Many of those, a large percentage of those, were non-member in terms of not connected with our Lutheran church. It was viewed more as a Christian school than a Lutheran school. We had served there for 2 years. Went back to Seward and obtained my master's in education administration. In early 2000, took my first principalship at Central Lutheran in Newhall, Iowa, kind of a bedroom community to Cedar Rapids. The population of Newhall was 875 people, not 1,000, not just right at 875 people. This was obviously classified as a rural community. It was an association school. It was supported by 4 congregations. One of those congregations did end up leaving the association later on in my tenure due to financial issues. This was mostly a blue-collar community. However, we did have some that were white-collar from a 20-mile radius we would draw from. Enrollment was approximately 100 students. In the years that I spent there, we were able to grow it to 130 students. 85% of the membership were connected to one of our Lutheran congregations. So that very strong history was prevalent there. I served there for 7 years. Then I accepted a position out in Colorado at Emmanuel Lutheran in Loveland. The population was 68,000. So I've had a good mix of populations and communities in my career. Classified as a suburban school, really it's a suburban. Loveland's not suburban to anything, being that it's about an hour north of Denver, but by classification, it fit that size. Mostly a blue-collar community. Enrollment was 300 students, and in my time there, we were able to grow it to 320 students. 85% of the population was non-member, again, not associated with our Lutheran church. Most of them having connection to a Christian congregation, but similar to that of that urban feel of Florida. So I was there for 3 years prior to coming here to the South Wisconsin district. Here in the district, we have 56 elementary schools. 22 of those schools would be considered rural or small town. Besides the elementary schools, we have 6 high schools, and 2 of those would be considered small town but not rural. And I'll show some of the definitions here in a bit. And then we have 35 freestanding preschools, which the majority of those are located in a rural or small town setting. Now, for the disclaimer, and there's always a disclaimer, by no means am I an expert on this topic. There are those of you that might be participating today that have had past experience in a rural and small town setting. What I am going to do today is kind of give you my experiences in the form of both challenges and opportunities. As well, you may be participating in today's webinar and you're not classified as a rural or small town school, which is great. I'm glad you are participating with us. In my experiences and why I spent some time going through those, what is perceived as challenges and opportunities are not bound by geographical settings. So you'll be able to apply many of these same concepts regardless of what setting that you are in. So maybe the best way to begin is to determine whether or not a school is effective and functional so that we can at least address the title of this webinar. And in order to do that, maybe it's easier to address what is ineffective or what is dysfunctional or what it looks like. Or a question is, what makes a school ineffective or dysfunctional? Now, before I continue, there is a bluntness to this. So let's identify the elephant in the room now. Yes, there are ineffective and dysfunctional leaders and church workers. This is not just limited to rural and small town ministries. And my encouragement or advice to you is if there is an effective or dysfunctional leader, it does need to be addressed. If it is a teacher, it does need to be addressed. I would certainly contact your district office, your education executive to kind of help you walk through that process. There is a process, and it's not something that we have to enable. And that doesn't mean moving, people out or off the bus, but it is realizing that we can no longer allow for dysfunctional or ineffective leadership. So as we go through the presentation, I'm interested in knowing what makes schools ineffective or dysfunctional from your standpoint. I'm sure there are more reasons than just the obvious or what we talk about today. Being able to identify what it looks like will help us be able to address the concerns and the issues, or at least bring awareness to, and then ultimately how to implement change. To give us a greater understanding, a little bit of the definitions of what rural and small town schools are, here is the definition that I had used, and it's on the next slide here. And these are the definitions that the Rural and Small Town Ministry of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod use as well. With these guidelines, and I'm not seeing that slide up yet, but as it classifies for rural and small town, with these guidelines, 4 of my schools would be considered rural, and that's with a population of 2,500 or less. Okay, and then the other caveat is not within a 20-mile radius of a larger city. So 4 of my schools are considered rural. 18 of them would be considered small town, being at a population of 15,000 or less. So over a third of my schools in the South Wisconsin district are considered either rural or small town ministries. Moving along, just population doesn't define everything. So here's another example for considering when defining the community, and that is their main area of support. Example here, as I noted, is agribusiness or farming. However, there are schools in communities of 25,000 and greater that have similar experiences to that of a school in a geographical rural setting. So we realize that not every community fits the population box or into how a community is supported. In the end, it is ultimately the community itself that defines itself. When describing ineffective and dysfunctional, Scripture has something to say about it. Ecclesiastes 1:2. Meaningless, says the teacher, utterly meaningless, everything is meaningless. Interesting note here that meaningless is mentioned 35 times in Ecclesiastes and only one other time in Scripture. The other one is Ecclesiastes 1:9. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. Both of these verses don't paint a very vibrant school ministry. But the overall sentiment of Ecclesiastes is that everything is useless, everything is hollow, everything is futile, everything is vain when it's apart from the Word of God. And this is key for all of our schools. We are useless regardless of our size, regardless of our geographical setting, unless we are connected to God's Word. So this, to me, brings hope for all of our schools. Now, when you may never be considered as a school of 100 or even 150. Many of you have probably seen this slide before from our school statistics report. I would have included this year's data, but because of the response and reporting, the school ministry has altered what they are asking for. But nevertheless, this will give us a picture of what the average is. When we look at issues pertaining to the validity or solvency of a school, as already mentioned, there are great similarities to those schools in a suburban or even urban setting to that of a rural or small town school. So as we look at those different challenges and opportunities on the next slides, many are experienced in a school regardless of the size or the setting. So let's start looking at the challenges, and I've noted 7 challenges here. And by the way, just because it's listed as a challenge, it doesn't mean that it's negative or that it's an issue to be addressed. But it's something that we need to be aware of. And by the way, for every challenge that is listed here, in an upcoming slide, we will also have a different way to look at that challenge as an opportunity. So of these 7, this is what I came up with. And again, please, if you see additional challenges or have experienced additional challenges, please note them in the tool bar on the left. So history and past. Sometimes as a leader, this is our biggest enemy, especially if you're not from the area. And for the congregation who own, and there's quotation marks there, who own the school, the past and its history is sometimes difficult to give up. What were the norms or the expectations are no longer. As an example, Lutheran schools for our Lutheran kids. Now, our oldest school in Synod, or was our oldest school in Synod, was St. Matthew's Lutheran School in Manhattan. It began in 1752 and unfortunately closed its doors at the end of the 2005 school year. With that length of history, you know that there is a part of the history and past that had to change in order for it to succeed that many years. I firmly believe that is also the things that our schools currently need to also address, and we'll talk about some of those. Looking at student recruitment. Now, I want to be careful about this one because obviously demographics play a part of this. Some schools might only have 5 to 7 families that visit or tour the school on a yearly basis. So to expect large numbers knocking on our door is not necessarily likely. But here's what I want to consider. The openness to the community. In smaller communities, we can be very protective of our own. And I think those of us that have served in small town, rural ministries, we understand that ownership from the congregation. So the question is how do we make outsiders feel welcomed? And one example, which I will continue to address in a later slide, is member versus non-member tuition. Okay, so that's just one example. There are others that, in terms of how we kind of protect our own. Looking at class sizes, many of our small schools have combination grades, at least dual, maybe even some that have a triple or even more combinations in one physical space. I've never dealt with anything beyond a dual classroom, so those may bring additional challenges to it, which again I'm not able to address, but would like to hear more about in terms of how they can be addressed. But the thing I want you to think about here is how do you sell this to families or families of prospective students? Oftentimes I think this is looked as a challenge or a barrier for growth and bringing in new families, but there are great advantages for combination classrooms. Another challenge or obstacle might be funding. There might be some unique funding sources that our schools rely on. As an example, local businesses, matching programs within the community. I have not seen a go-to plan that dissipates those financial concerns. My assumption would be that more of our rural and small town schools are still heavily subsidized by the congregation, which is great. This was the case for me while I was in Iowa. It was about 2002, 2 years after that I had arrived, that we had actually implemented tuition for our families at a very minimal rate. The other piece talking about here with funding is academic programs and technology integration likely falls under this category because most of it is connected to funding. By the way, and this is my personal feeling, and I'll state it now, but utilizing bequests or similar types of gifts should not be used for the day-to-day operation of the school. I think our schools can become too dependent on those resources, and once those resources are gone, they are gone. And then what does a school do? Another challenge for a rural or small town school could be staffing. Long tenured staff, sometimes married into the community. So what happens is if this is an ineffective teacher, how do we address it? How do we move them from point A to point B? And sometimes point B might be off bus or into a different area. So there's that issue. There's also the issue of the new teacher that arrives, right? Coming right out of school. What is it for them outside of the church or school ministry, and how do we help them kind of adjust to the atmosphere? And lastly, principals in terms of staffing. There are fewer and fewer wanting to take on this role, and I think even more so in a rural setting. We also have as challenges is our facilities. Sometimes, or many of them, can be out of date, in need of remodel. I want you to think about the aesthetics here. Think about the visitor's first impression of your school. and in keeping in mind that you only get one first impression. So how are you going to make it? And then the last challenge that I picked was that relational piece, that relationship between pastor, congregation, school, principal, staff. And I think this speaks for itself. If this doesn't exist, or it is impaired in any way, the ministry, I believe, will ultimately suffer. So how does one connect to the other? All right. So these were just 7 different challenges that I think our schools face and need to address. And we're going to take a look at opportunities here now on each one of those. But before I get to that, these are musts. I have 4 musts that I would strongly encourage school ministries to be thinking about or working towards. First and foremost, relationships. All right, we all understand how important those are. Unfortunately, I think we take too many of them for granted. And in fact, it needs to be relationships need to be the foundation of what we do and how we connect with people. We have all seen leaders, we have all seen teachers that are unable to relate. So the general question, how is their ministry doing? When we talk about people and relationships, we can't fix it with the program. Okay, we've got to fix the person. We can't fix the program. So it's not about programs; it's about people. Once it's about people, programs become easy. All right. So if you don't have that relationship, it's going to be difficult to implement any necessary changes. The other piece here that I believe is a must is a strategic plan. Now, I don't know why, but there seems to be a lot of congregations and schools unwilling to develop a strategic plan. It might be because of the know-how or the familiarity with it. Unfortunately, part of my working here in the district office is what I've seen is the likeliness is because it's actually identifying what the problem or the concern is, as well as this puts leaders in an uncomfortable realm that they may not be used to. And then there's the piece for the leaders to be accountable to the plan. It is my strong encouragement as I do district work to really encourage school ministries and congregations themselves to do strategic planning, just that 3 to 5 year projection. The other piece is a SWOT analysis. Most strategic plans involve a SWOT analysis, but let's say you don't want to go through a strategic plan. I think the SWOT analysis will at least give you something to consider in terms of at least bring awareness to. So in those 4 areas, without actually having to develop a strategic plan. So maybe it's one or the other, but at least do a SWOT analysis so that you are aware of some of the concerns, some of the weaknesses, opportunities, threats. And then the last one, communication. In the end, as all of you know, whether you're an administrator or whether you're a teacher or whether you're a pastor, we can never communicate enough to the different stakeholders that we have in the ministry, especially when it comes to describing and implanting our vision and direction for the ministry. So whenever there's opportunity, and sometimes you may have to create that opportunity, be ready to cast and sell that vision. So let's look at the opportunities here. And again, what I have done is I took the challenges from the previous slide and I've kind of renamed them into more of an opportunity format. So when we look at opportunities, or when we look at the history or the past, I want you to embrace the past and communicate it. Many of our congregations, many of our communities have educational opportunities outside of the public school for parents to choose from, right? So you go into a community and the first thing a new family does is they look at all of the educational opportunities. However, there is comfort to know that our Lutheran schools, our Lutheran systems have a deep and significant history We are not some fly-by-night program. I really experienced this while I was in Colorado, because there we had a lot of charter schools, magnet schools that were popping up all over the place. And we had a history that we could communicate and be proud of. So embrace it, communicate it. When talking about the challenges of our history before, it was more in line with engaging and welcoming the community. I think I think the number one barrier for any non-member family to feel acceptance is just that, being not a part of, because they are not Lutheran. So what ideas can diminish that feeling for our families that are coming in? Now, I'll state the obvious, and I've alluded to it already, but let's get rid of the categorization between member and non-member. As the example of tuition, member tuition, non-member tuition, right? A barrier in itself. However, if we're unable to make them equal, then I would change at least the verbiage of non-member to community member. Make them a member of something. Don't make them a member of non. Make them a member of something. Lastly, regarding embracing our community, we realize that the birth rate in America is going down, and so less babies, in the end result, less Lutherans, right? So it is becoming more difficult to fill our seats with our Lutheran families. If we want to remain or provide value in what we do, we need to attract those not associated with our church, which leads us to the next opportunity. When we talked about student recruitment, I want you to consider engaging your community. The end goal here is student recruitment. However, in many rural and small town settings, there is a limited number of students to draw from. So here are 5 ideas that I want to share with you that you should consider when reaching beyond your walls. The first one, the public school is not your competition. You are selling something they can't provide. Other Christian schools are your competition. So make sure you connect with the other non-public schools, see what they do, know their differences between your two schools. Families that are school shopping will want to know what those differences are. It doesn't make you badmouth them, but you understand what their program is. Number 2, in terms of engaging your community, work on the relationship with your public school administrator. Most of your kids are going to go there after graduation anyway, unless there is a Lutheran high school in the area. So ask to be involved in leadership meetings. This was a huge experience for me, great experience for me when I was in Iowa. The public school superintendent involved me in all of their administrative meetings that they had. They accepted me as one of their own because they realized that my kids would be going into their system in the future. Where you can do professional development together, do it. A great way to connect two or more educational entities. Number 3, the best form of marketing your school is word of mouth. It's also the worst form, especially in smaller communities. Be able to communicate the mission and vision clearly. What do you stand for? Make sure that it is known. That's the best way that people will remember who you are and the values and the characteristics that you stand for. Number 4, remember who the customer is at all times when engaging your community. What are their needs? Do we even ask what their needs are? And they need to be more than just educational asks, right? We have a product that we provide during a day, but what are the things that could be provided after school? It might be before and after school care. Think about the athletics. Students in athletics tend to adapt easier in a school setting. So what about the students that are not athletics? Are there programs or clubs that they can be involved in, such as robotics or chess or art class? We need to take those into consideration in how to make our families feel more a part of our school. And number 5, how are new families assimilated into the school? It has to be more than just getting families into the door. So it could be a beginning of the year picnic get-together for new families. You could have host families that check in with the new families throughout the year. Communicate upcoming events. As an example, Christmas concerts in a week. As a reminder, all students need to be there, 30 minutes before the program starts. Make it personal, right? Because that's how you're going to not only engage families, but that's how you're going to keep families. And then connect with parent organizations. We all have parent organizations involved in our school. Connect them to those organizations, and then ways that they're able to be involved as well. Looking at the barrier of class sizes, I went with this with multi-grade classrooms. As I mentioned, there are advantages, huge advantages to multi-grade classrooms. Make sure these are communicated. I know it's probably been a couple of years ago, but they're on the LEA listserv. At one point in time, there was a string of emails that were going back and forth listing the advantages of multi-grade classrooms. Know them, communicate them to the new families that might not have experienced those before. As well, talk about how those classes are taught, so that there's not that feeling that the curriculum is being dummied down or that the curriculum is too hard. Where at all possible, consider having core classes separated. Maybe even having a part-time teacher coming in for an hour or two a day to be able to do that. That's what we did when I was in Iowa. We had combination classrooms. They were self-sufficient for a while. Later on in the tenure there, we were able to bring in part-time teachers. So it gave those parents an ease of knowing that their kids are getting the curriculum that they need at their grade level. Obviously, all of this is connected to funding, and that was the other barrier that we had talked about, or issue that we had talked about. So I'm going to address this in affording the extras. I believe when it comes to funding the elements of a day school program, those items must be included in the operating budget. Those would be things like staffing, curriculum, supplies, maintenance, and the list could go on. Because of our schools have such bare bone budgets, many don't have the ability to afford the extras or those for special projects. So what I mean by extras is in relation to being competitive in your community or competitive to your counterparts. As an example, all of the elementary schools in the area have interactive whiteboards, right? But you do not. It's not a necessary need to have them. You can still educate without interactive whiteboards. And the way technology is going, at one point in time, they're going to be obsolete. But it gives the customer a level playing field when they are making a decision on a school. So take that as consideration. A couple of other things in terms of affording the extras. First and foremost, know your stakeholders and connect with them, not just when you want something or not just when you send out the annual appeal, but connect with them frequently. Put them on distribution lists. The different categories of people to ask are your parents. Okay, I found great success in asking parents to fund the extras in my schools. Obviously, alumni. We need to do a better job with alumni in our schools and keeping track of them and connecting them back to what gave them a great opportunity in a Christian education. Grandparents, local businesses, your congregation, your church ladies, the LWML, your men's groups. These are all great avenues to ask for additional support. So stakeholders. Secondly, know the vision and be able to communicate it. You're going to hear me say this a number of times throughout the presentation. You have to know the vision. You have to go through that hard work and understanding the direction of where you want to go. So know it, be able to communicate it, and why the students will be better for it in terms of being able to afford the extras. Number 3, pick 1, maybe 2 projects a year. Don't overwhelm stakeholders with a bunch of wants and needs. Be strategic about it. You don't want to turn them off, yet you also want to identify where their passion is in as well. And number 4, acknowledgement is important, and it has to be more than just a thank you note, right? Involve them in the ribbon cutting. We did a playground project when I was in Iowa. We brought in all of our sponsors in for the ribbon cutting. Or if we were installing the interactive whiteboards, we brought the people in that donated those so they could actually see how they went in. And it ties them to the project. It makes it personal, and it brings ownership. If the issue is truly the inability to fund the operating budget, then obviously you're going to need to look at cuts, and certainly cuts with minimal effect. And by the way, someone is going to be affected when you're trimming budgets, whether it's directly or indirectly. I strongly discourage the utilization of endowment dollars to balance the budget or to clear the budget. Borrowing with the intent to pay. This only buys time, and it doesn't address the real issue. Okay. Going back to, has a 3 to 5 year financial plan been developed? One of the things as the new process of accreditation is rolled out, I wish that was one of the components that was still in the process. I think there's great value and benefit to having that in there. So those of you that are accredited or going through the process, strong encouragement, continue to keep that 3 to 5 year financial plan. If anything, it's going to bring awareness to projections, the projections of enrollment, tuition, benefit compensation projections for the staff. In the end, if the ministry can't be somewhat fiscally solvent, there needs to be conversation in what the future looks like. And at times, unfortunately, it does mean closing a school. But sometimes there are other ministries that can sprout from that closure of a school. Yes, as sad as that is, there can be good things that can come from when schools have to close. So looking at the next item is most valued resources. We talk about staffing as kind of being a challenge for those that have a lot of tenure at the school. So teachers need to be more than teachers. They also need to be the school's strongest advocates and supporters. I kind of look at them as being the closers of the school. They come in and close the deal. I take a family on a tour, they close the deal. The role of the teacher extends beyond the regular workday, and from my experience, most of them do. However, any dissension in the ranks creates a sense of uncertainty, of vision and direction, and can easily undo anything that has been put in place or established. When policies, processes are implemented, it is critical that everyone is on board. If there is an agreement, those conversations do need to take place. That's just part of being a leader. And as that door opens, there is unification in it. Teachers, specifically in rural and small town settings, live under a microscope. I lived under a microscope in Iowa. Get used to it. Those with longer tenure understand this. Teachers that are new to small town ministry tend to have a little bit more difficulty with this. So I want you to be thinking about items that will help them transition. In the end, treat your teachers as the most valued resource that you have, because of all of the extras that are expected of them. You think of the prep times or the lack of prep times that are offered to teachers in smaller rural town schools, ways to reward them. If you're a building principal, take on a recess. I think in my time as administrator, I've always done a recess in every school that I've been in. Um, do lunch duty for the teachers. Find parents, find grandparents, find congregational members that are willing to donate a couple of hours a week to provide your teachers a little bit of a break. Bring a snack. I often found people are willing to help. They just need to be asked. So ask for those things that don't require any type of monetary exchange. Again, treat the teachers like they're kings and queens. It's like the book. If you don't feed the teachers, they'll eat the students. The other barrier that we talked about was facilities. This is, I want you to think about first impressions. If nothing else is known about your program, how do you create that first impression? You have one shot at it. Just like buying a house, you notice the outside first. It's the curb appeal. Is it welcoming? Is it aesthetically pleasing? Is the grass mowed? Plants watered? Are the glass doors cleaned, or do they have smudge marks all over the place? Are the visitor parking spots clearly identified? Are the entrances and offices well marked? These are the simple things. Now, getting to the inside, you and your staff are going to wow them with information, almost information overload, in which half of it they probably won't remember. Better to answer the questions than rattling off information that they can read about. Hopefully you have some type of visitor's packet that they can take with them. Think of it this way. It's a conversation. It's a time to get to know them, a time to get to know the students. Once the tour begins, are the hallways cluttered? Are students in the hallways behaving as they should? Are art projects adorning the hallways? Are bathrooms presentable and properly equipped? I say properly equipped because before a remodel that we did in our bathrooms, we didn't have changing tables. Yet when I was giving tours of families, they all seem to have small and little kids and all seem to need to use the restroom. So they're going to go into them, make sure that they're clean and properly equipped. You don't need to do a total remodel. Many of our older buildings existing in our rural and small town settings are very well adequate enough. Yes, some updates might be necessary, but to me the biggest factor is cleanliness. That speaks to me of greater than just having a total remodel. The last piece we want to talk about in terms of the opportunity was that whole relation piece and really building trust in relationships. Trust among staff members and stakeholders are the biggest in the community when it comes to the strength of the school. Without the ability to trust in what someone says or what the program stands for, will greatly affect team ministry. One of the resources that I often refer to and use myself was written by Terry Schmidt. It's a 2002 LEA monograph, and the title is Building Trust in Relationships. This 10-page document identifies why trust is important in a relationship, what factors destroy trust, what factors build trust. Being able to identify what trust looks like and how it's cultivated will enable a ministry to operate efficiently and effectively. I have personally used the resource, and again, as I mentioned, I strongly encourage and push it onto my administrators to utilize it. In fact, I did it again this week. I gave somebody the copy or the resource to it. And it doesn't mean, when we look at trust and relationships, it doesn't mean that that it's giving in. It's not a battle. It's not about giving in. It's not about altering your values, but it's being able to work together in team ministry. So those were the 7 areas of opportunities to address the challenges. Lastly, before any questions, list of resources here. District offices, utilize them. That's what we get paid for. Your congregations are paying for our service, so utilize us. We don't necessarily have all of the answers, but we can typically connect you with resources to help you guide you through those challenges and look at them as opportunities. As well as I do a lot of, I shouldn't say a lot, I do some strategic planning here for our schools. I have resources available that allow me to do that with our schools. Other valued partners, as you can see there, is school ministry, Lutheran Education Association. Find value in all of their webinars. Obviously, small and rural and small town ministries in St. Louis, a huge supporter of what we do and why we do. So in closing, going back to the initial question, are rural and small town schools effective and functional? Absolutely. Tied to a biblical standpoint, yes, they are. I've spent 7 wonderful years in that type of atmosphere. It allowed me to grow as a leader. And as I discussed with the different challenges and opportunities, those were real. Those were things that as a leader I had to figure out. Fortunately enough, because there was such an emphasis on trust, I was allowed to do it, and it made it a whole lot easier. So hopefully this has been helpful for you. If anything, it gives you a few ideas to be effective and functional where you are located. So thank you. So I'd bring on any questions.
Oh, great. Thank you very much, Mark. That was, you gave us a lot of information there. And we've had really comments and questions as we've been going on. So I'll just kind of run down the list. If any of you have any other questions that you come up with as we're talking here for the next few minutes, please type those in the chat box, but we'll get there. I did want to let everyone know we can make the PowerPoint available to you. Just let us know what you would like or where you'd like us to send it, and we can do that. But one of the questions, Mark, that came up right away was this LEA trust document that you referenced. Is where can that be made available to the folks, or is that something we could get a hold of and put out? How can we get that into people's hands?
Yeah, it's available on the LEA website. So as a member of LEA, you have access to all of those documents. If not a member of LEA, what I would do is I would contact John Lobbs at LEA. He's the executive director, and ask him for a copy of that resource. But as a member, it is available on the LEA website.
Okay, so go to the LEA website or contact, what was the name again?
John Lobbs.
Okay, wonderful. We'll take care of that. And
LEA.org, and you can find all of his contact information.
Go from there. So LEA.org. Super. Thank you. I just wondered, and we're backing up quite a ways here to the beginning of the presentation, and you had talked about finances and financial management. We had one of our attendees had talked about trying, and we hear this an awful lot, not just with schools, but congregations as well. They're operating with no budget and oftentimes with no one who has any financial management training. Can you speak just a little bit about the importance of having that budget and the working relationship between church and school?
Well, to me, it's understanding what you have and what you don't have in terms of financial means. As a school administrator, I was very tied into what the budget looked like. I was very tied into the development of the budget. And without it, I think you're walking blindly. So it's one of those things. Yeah, you may not have the direct know-how or capacity to balance budgets, and not that difficult. You take your expenses, you take your income, and you make them match, right? But it is I'm not sure how schools and congregations not do it. A few years ago, there were a variety of funding academies that addressed a lot of this. I know that there was talk of bringing some of those back. That's probably a Terry Schmidt school ministry question, at least of those resources that talked basically the specifics of budgeting and what it looks like. Probably guide you in that direction. But very important for everybody to be on the same page.
Absolutely, and it really, from a stewardship standpoint, it only makes sense to be able to have a budget and be able to stick with that budget, and it's just it's almost it almost goes without saying, but yet we still run into it all the time.
Yeah.
When you have a congregation, as one of our attendees put it here, he said 68% of the offering at the church goes to the school, but there's no it's tough to have accountability of that much money. I very much appreciated what you talked about, first impressions, and we had one of our attendees mention that first impressions are challenging and often disappointing in a lot of our rural schools because they're not. They assume they were shopping for what we offer with regard to a Lutheran education, but I think more and more folks out in rural and small town areas are often looking at a model more like the suburban areas, and they're shopping for a place. They're shopping for more private school mentality. Can you speak a little more about meeting that impression, please?
Well, yeah, and I think this is really addressing the new generation of families that have kids of school age, and it's really my generation. It's the Generation X, and it's going to get into the Generation IY in terms of, all right, what are the needs of these families, and what is best for us to, in terms of what we can provide for them. Because I think you're right. If they haven't had an experience in a rural setting before, they have the biggest dreams and the biggest expectations that you may not be able to provide. I've always communicated it this way to families. We may not be what you're looking for. We may not be able to provide all of the bells and whistles as a neighboring school or as the school that you are coming from. But here's what we can provide. And I feel that being able to articulate that of what you are and what you are not will bring to them or inform them that honesty is important for you. And in some cases, we may not be the right institution or program for you. So honesty is it.
Very good, thank you. And Chris Veras just put on here and made a very good point. First impressions are often found online in many times, especially today. And we've actually done several educational opportunities on making a good first impression online for congregations as well as schools. Can you speak to that as well?
Yeah, great point. Have a strong online presence, because nowadays, they're not going to drive by your school prior to looking you up on the internet. So spend some time on the school website, making sure that it's articulating what you want it to articulate clearly. But that's exactly right. I wouldn't expect any family that's school shopping to just drive up without having looked at your website.
Very good. Thank you. One of the question was, can you talk about some of the benefits of small schools becoming accredited?
The benefits? Yeah. In fact, I just had a conversation about that this morning. About two-thirds of our schools here in the South Wisconsin District are accredited. I would say the majority of our rural and small town schools are not accredited. And first of all, it's to define and understand what that reasoning is. Is it a financial reason? Is it the $350 annual fee? Is it the visits that the site visits that take place? What is it? In the end, as I sell it to our schools, it's an opportunity to improve. And it's taking you where you are at and taking you to the next level. And in the different standards that are addressed in there, I don't think schools can really function well without it, because there's a strategic component to it, which, again, I identified it in the presentation, that is very, very important. So that accreditation piece can act as a strategic plan. So very important for our rural and small town schools, specifically when you look at the future of them and how are they going to remain viable.
Very good. Yeah, it's sometimes we need that kind of push to become to get that strategic plan put in place. That's very good. Another question was just regarding SLED and that opportunity. Can you talk a little bit about that?
That's more of a school ministry piece, but what SLED does design, and I have not been through SLED. SLED is preparing those next educational leaders to step into a school setting and take over as administrator. It's a beginning process. I think the hope and the desire that there is actually continuing education there afterwards, working towards the master's. But there's probably going to need to be somebody more familiar with the program, the SLED program, than myself. Again, a school ministry, Terry Schmidt. I know that there are a number of people that work with SLED. I think there might even be some on here that would have more experience with the SLED program than I would.
Yeah, Terry is a great resource for that, and you can find that information under school ministry at lcms.org, or just give school ministries a call. Terry's a great resource on that.
What I do with SLED on an annual basis, Terry will reach out to us and he will ask for nominations of potential leaders for our schools. And so I really connect with my administrators in the district, and we begin to identify teachers who have kind of that natural skill set and character to be able to, or to encourage them to go into the SLED program and to take on a leadership role.
Great. One of our attendees was interested in if there is any resource available to maybe congregations who are looking at trying to start a school in a rural or small town setting.
That's a great question. The only program that I'm aware of is and it's been around for a while, is the Genesis program, and that's basically a program that does really an in-depth evaluation of demographics, of community, of support. Again, it's a school ministry piece, but there is a program that has helped to what that day school would potentially look like. There is also one that is designed for more early childhood centers, and I believe it's called In His Hands. It's just coming out. It is available, but in printed form, it will be out shortly and can be used to help direct congregations who are interested in early childhood programs.
Great. So again, take advantage of that, and if you need any help getting any of those resources from school ministry, don't be afraid to contact our office as well. We'd be glad to hook you up with that. We are all the way out in Concordia, Missouri, but we have a pretty direct line back to all of that. One of the other questions we had is, can a school get too small to function well? Many small schools have closed in our area.
Personally, yes, I believe that. A couple of years ago, I had one of those schools in our district that was just too small, and the best thing for it was to close. And again, it allowed the congregation an opportunity to expand in other ministries. The school that I had, I think, had five kids in it, and there was a Catholic school in the community. It was less than probably 1,000 in terms of population of the community itself. There was a Catholic school. There's another Lutheran school, 5 miles down the road. And it wasn't because of leadership. It wasn't because of dysfunction. It's just because they didn't have a lot of the programming that I think a lot of parents were looking for. So yeah, in some cases, I think it is, or would be encouraged for the school to close. But I have a school that's 35, right? And it's it's not the numbers of where they would want to be. But I think with right leadership, right vision, and being able to articulate that, I think it could easily grow.
Very good. I don't know. Go ahead.
A lot of it relies on leadership. So much of how our schools function and thrive or not thrive, it falls on our leadership. And that's both principal and pastor.
Very good. And that relationship is key.
Yeah.
And related question was, what is too small? I don't know if we can really put a number on that. It really depends on circumstance, I would imagine.
Yeah. Certain circumstances, demographics, the congregation, do they see it as a value ministry of the church?
Well, and just with regard to that as well, that's one thing that we at Rural Small Town Mission try to help congregations do as well, is take a self-assessment looking at the assets and the demographics and the resources in the congregation. And many times we're working with congregations that have schools, so they can look at that overarching picture to see what realistic view we have of our future and the strategic planning that needs to go into that. One more quick question. We're kind of running towards the end of this here, but it says federal and state regulations are making it harder and harder to have multi-grade classes. Do you know of any resource to prepare for that?
I don't. Obviously, state by state, it's a little bit different. We have not had that effect on us here in Wisconsin specifically. So, no, that's a great question that just not going to be able to answer. But I haven't personally seen anything come from federal or state specific to Wisconsin.
Okay, very good. Well, again, thank you, Mark. The information you provided has been fantastic. We do have a couple of great events coming up here in the near future. We've got a webinar in July on Thursday, the 10th of July at 1 o'clock, Witnessing Grandparents by Dr. Rich Bimler, Ambassador for Health, Hope, and Aging. And Rich is a great dynamic guy. If you want to talk about ideas for ministry with older adults and grandparents, Rich is your guy. So he'll be very entertaining and be a good one to take advantage of. Also then, in August, on the 14th of August, we have Transitioning to a Worker Priest Model, and that will be by Reverend Troy New Year. Troy was behind me at the Summit a couple of years, but he's in Hudson, Michigan, and so we're going to listen to him on ways to transition into a worker priest model. Also, everybody remember that registration is open for our National Mission Conference, which will be held at the Kansas City Airport Marriott. That is November 6th through the 8th, and if you need any more information on that, please contact us, but we'd be glad to have everybody there. Again, Mark, thank you very much for your information for us today. It's truly appreciate all that you've given to us. If any of you out there need to have any more information, we would be glad to get that to you. Just contact us at our office. And may the grace of God go with you. And our prayer is that you will be supported and enriched in your school ministries. God blessing to you all today.
All right. Thank you.